Hello there, welcome to Fridays at Noon. I'm Michael Chen, the executive producer and director for this talk show series. Fridays at Noon is a bi-weekly lunch and learn series that offers education on professional development topics to the University of Denver employees. For more information and to view past videos, please visit du.edu/HR and click on the People Development link. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the show.
And bring your lunch.
And bring your lunch.
Well, welcome to Fridays at Noon. My name is Ken Pennock. I'm the Director for People Development here at the University of Denver. And today we're going to continue with our series, The 8 Simple Rules for Managing Conflict. And with Greg Giesen, our Manager of People Development, who really crafted these, and he's been a leader working with units in the area of conflict. So welcome.
Thank you, Ken.
Glad you're here. Seems like I saw you recently on one of these, so it's good. And I would be remiss, of course, if I didn't mention that, a lot of changes happening. The Cubs won, and the Oakland Raiders are getting good again. So it's a balance of what is good or what not, right? Yeah. So, but anyway, welcome. So I want to mention that rules 1 through 5 are on video on our Fridays at Noon tab on the People Development website, as well as articles. Similarly, actually, all the articles on the 8 Simple Rules are available in the article tab on our People Development website, so I encourage you to definitely check that out. But today we're here about 6. So tell us about rule number 6.
All right, well, rule number 6 is called Ask for What You Need. And probably similar to Rule 5, the best way to explain it is with a story first. So I'm going to tell you a little story.
Okay.
And it's a story we've used before on the Managing Up Fridays at Noon.
Okay.
But it's very relevant, and as we'll discuss, there's really a relevancy to managing up and asking for what you need. So, all right, so the story essentially begins... and it's my story. I was working for, at the time, the 3rd largest nonprofit in the world, and it was, and we provided leadership development, essentially, which is ironic when you hear this story.
Yes.
But not unusual for a lot of corporations that we've worked with.
Or leader developing people.
So,
Right.
do as I say, not as I do kind of situation.
Right.
And it was a great opportunity, and there was a red flag the moment I got hired that I didn't really realize until after the fact, and that is the guy that I was replacing. I remember he said to me, because the executive director's name was Terry, he said, oh, by the way, if Terry calls you on the phone and wants to see you, grab a pad of paper and get down there right away. And I just kind of laugh. I'm like, oh, okay,
right.
Sure. Whatever.
What
yeah,
could
of
that
course
mean?
I would do that, right? I mean, why was that a big deal? And then as I started working there, what I realized was what he was talking about, which was Terry, the executive director, was a very dynamic guy. In fact, whenever he was speaking in front of large crowds, he could make people laugh, he could make people cry. He was just very dynamic. And then I remember people always came up to me afterwards and they're like, boy, are you lucky to work for Terry, and it must be the most amazing thing, and I would just smile and go, I know, I'm very fortunate. But what they didn't know is he had kind of 2 personalities. As I think a lot of us maybe have a work personality and maybe an on-stage personality, but and the work personality became more and more difficult for me, because what his habit is when he wanted to see you, he didn't mean, it wasn't a question. Like he would say, can you come down? Wasn't with a question mark. It was an exclamation point.
Right.
And I very quickly caught that, and then he would hang up. It was never, hello, how are you? Are you busy? When you get a chance? Bring the Johnson report. It was nothing like that. It was basically, get down here. And it felt like a parent-child dynamic. Okay, so I'm trying to figure this out. So I would grab the pad of paper, and it wasn't just down here, like down the stairs and to the right. there was like a long hallway, so you had plenty of time to think.
To build up the
And you never knew what
tension.
you were walking into, if
Yeah.
it was a lion's den or if it was maybe a compliment or maybe it was a file he wanted to talk about or a report you just finished. You didn't know.
Yeah.
So I'm walking down these hallways, and then you get right to his grouchy secretary, who would basically say, "What do you want?"
It runs in the department or something.
I'm like, Terry just called me, and so, that just kind of made it even more awkward. And then I'd walk in there, and undoubtedly, whatever he wanted was something I didn't have. And then I would have to go get it and come back. And the more this happened, and it was a regular thing, the more uncomfortable I became with it, because I didn't really know why. I thought it was rude, among other things, that there's no interpersonal conversation on the phone, but not knowing what he wanted kind of drove me crazy. And so, over time it would just kind of weigh on me, and something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. So the other managers, and this should have been another red flag. Now keep in mind, this was like years ago. Every Friday there was a tradition, an unwritten norm, that the managers would sneak out at lunch and go to a pub.
Okay.
And we'd have lunch at the pub with pitchers of beer. Now, we wouldn't do that today, but I'm trying to fit in. So I'm like, oh, okay. I guess this is what we do. And really, the reason they snuck out is they didn't want Terry to come along with, because if he saw people going to lunch together, he'd want to go. And then when he does go, it's a very awkward
It's a
lunch,
different kind of event.
because you're
right?
just talking about clients, and it's just very uncomfortable.
Right.
What they really wanted was to tell Terry stories. I mean, like, this was their place, the Friday afternoons club, I guess, to vent and joke and tease and also tell Terry stories. And I realized later that was kind of how they coped with his management style. So I tried to play along, and I'd throw a story in here or there or whatever, but that wasn't solving any of my uncomfortableness with how the interaction with him. So one day I had enough guts at our Friday luncheon to bring it up, and I said, doesn't it bother you guys that he just demands that you come down, like he's our parent? And they all laughed. And they're like, oh, that's just Terry. I'm like, well, shouldn't we do something? Should we say something? I was hoping they're all experienced. Maybe one of them would. And they're like, oh, no. They go, the last guy that confronted Terry was shown the door. And so they're like...
And they were serious.
Yeah.
I mean, it
they're
wasn't...
like, if you want job security, you'll just figure out a way to do workarounds, right? Which a lot of us do for managers. Like I do it with you all the time.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. We've adapted. My Friday afternoon is the beer.
Yeah.
You're just not invited to that one.
Oh, really? So clearly I wasn't getting any support from my peers, right?
Yeah.
And what I realized, they were just enabling it. And now, now much more experienced in my career, I realize that's not that unusual. Is people, they find ways to work around their boss, and if they can do it and still get maybe their needs met, they're okay.
Kind of that path of least resistance, just get the job done.
Yeah, and it's sometimes the devil is better than the devil you don't, or I don't know how that saying goes, but something like that. So, but for me though, I was an up and coming manager, and I'm like, this is just not right. What do I? And so I would reflect, and I'm like, what is it that's really triggering me? Is it the rudeness and the, I need to see you right away, the parent-child thing? Or is it this long walk down this hallway not knowing what's ahead of me? And then I thought it out, and I'm like, the demanding part, that's probably a personality thing, and, I could really probably let that go. So what was it? So I had to think about what was being triggered, and what I came up with was, what was really bothering me was I felt incompetent, not knowing what I was walking into. Yeah. And that actually stirred up more anxiety for me than just, can you come down here now? And then I thought, okay, so what is that? So, and I'm doing this all on my own. It's not like I got instructions, right? So I'm like, all right, so I feel incompetent. That's what it is. I feel incompetent, and then I'm thinking, all right, so what do I need differently? I need to feel competent. How could I do that? Now, this is all work I'm doing with myself. Some people can do it with a coach or whatever, but I'm doing it all myself. And then I realize, all right, so what I need is, how could I feel competent? It'd be very simple. All he would have to do is tell me what he needs.
Right.
That's it. I'm like, that's not too hard, anybody. But then I'm like, how do I ask for it? Because I don't want to be the next guy that's showing the tour.
Right.
And I was getting no support, right? So I kind of, in my mind, kind of mapped out how I was going to do it. I was going to pose it in a request. And so picture being Terry and then seeing if the way I bring up this issue feels in any way like I'm challenging you. Because that's what I didn't want to do. Because if you felt challenged...
Then I'll push back.
Yeah. And so we're at this meeting, and here's ironic. It's ironic with the parent-child dynamic because he was a small man, gold medal winner, by the way, in wrestling.
The medal's in his office.
Probably, at least, but he had this big desk, like a tall desk, with 2 little chairs. Now, I never really noticed that before until this day when I had to have this conversation because he was kind of looking down, like what he... So, which now I would never buy, but back then that was...
Yeah.
Your choice was one of the 2 chairs in front of this big desk. So he goes, so we're meeting and he's telling me all these things I have to do and all this. And then at the end he goes, is there anything else? And I'm like kind of shaking inside because I keep remembering the last guy that... And so I said, actually there is. I was looking at my hands. Yeah. He's like... What? I'm like, no, now here's the part. I said, you know what would be helpful to me? He's like, what? I'm like, the next time you need me, like right away, like with a sense of urgency, could you just take a second to tell me what it's concerning? I go, because that way I can bring whatever I need to bring and be prepared when I walk in your office and not waste your time.
There you go.
I go, is that something you're willing to do? And he's like, yes.
Because what I'm hearing at the end is the advantage for him.
Right, and that's the managing up part.
Yeah.
So, so I said that, and he said yes, and I remember thinking, that's it? It was that easy? I spent 6 months drinking beer, worried about this,
and it was
not getting any support, and all I had to do was ask.
And
I was like, I was just amazed. Well, the point of that was the fact that I said it, because, I had to remind him of that a few times later, but it was much easier because he remembered. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. Remind him to tell me what it was he needed on the phone or whatever it was. But what it did, though, was it gave me a sense of competence because I had that little, as I was walking down to his office, I had the file. I knew what he was going to ask. I was prepared. It was efficient. And I didn't feel incompetent anymore.
Just as an aside, did you notice, you mentioned you were newer, did any of the other managers begin to do any of that? Or
no.
Approaching him, were they curious about it?
They had no interest.
They were just...
They had their own system,
there.
I guess,
okay.
in play.
It worked for them, and so they're just going to be...
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, it just changed everything for me.
It takes good courage too. It's hard, as you were describing.
Yeah. And so that story is will be the outlay for the conversation
that we're
going to
having.
have.
Well, then how does that relate as you meld this story into this rule?
Yeah.
How does it tie into 6?
Well, and here's the thing. So 6 is ask for what you need, right? Now, we both mediate conflicts. So, and that's where a lot of the 8 simple rules came from, was my experience as a conflict mediator. Things that I learned through mediation that I wish people knew or I could teach. And so that's really where this came up with. So this is kind of a model. Let's see. Yeah, you should be able to see this. Okay. Now, this is what I've learned over the years, is that here's what happens in conflict. And you can kind of see it on the screen too. Conflict happens, let's say right here. There's the conflict that occurs. Now, sometimes that might raise emotion, and then the emotion is what people see. But some of them aren't emotional. It's more of just a conflict, and it stays here. And so people negotiate around this, if they negotiate at all, if they even talk to each other about it. Sometimes they don't, as we know from our other rules, they don't talk about it, and then it still might show up this way.
Right.
In fact, it will show up this way indirectly or directly.
Right.
But what I've learned as a conflict mediator, and through that story, is where the real resolution is the needs not being met. You know, what causes conflict is an unmet need, a need that's not being met. And if we're able to identify that, it can change the whole conversation. Because when you just play on what the conflict is, let's say you and I had a conflict, and I want to talk it out, and how I'm talking it out is about how your behavior is annoying me and why, and what I want you to do instead. I'm making it about you, right? In this material that we talk about, the 8 simple rules, I often mention the difference between a relationship that matters and a relationship that doesn't. And what I mean by a relationship that matters is a relationship that matters, whether it's a family member, significant other, family, a coworker, where the relationship matters in the future. Like it makes sense for that relationship to work. Versus a stranger or someone at a bar, somebody at the PTA club, whatever it is that you have no relationship, no investment in the relationship. So for those, maybe you just resolve it from here.
Right.
But for the ones that matter, where the conversation matters, it's better to do the work, which is what need is not being met. And then, because when you can communicate from here, now it's about me.
Yes.
It's like, here's what I need from you, Ken. Are you willing to do it?
Right.
Just like I said for Terry.
Right, you're not putting them down.
Yeah.
Or saying so directly you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, because it's about me.
Right.
But if we don't take it to that level, then it becomes about you, and now there's a greater chance for conflict to play out, you against me, because it's about right and wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's speaking on this level. And so part of this rule is take the extra time to identify this and figure out a way to ask for it. And then what happens is, let's just say you're like, okay, or we negotiate around that need. All of a sudden the conflict goes away, and if I had emotions, there's nothing holding them in place. Because what holds them in place is this, but what's holding this in place is this. And so for the relationships that matter, having a conversation at this level, and this is what happens in, group work or even marital group work, or it's what do you need differently. So when we mediate conflicts,
Starting there.
This is really where the goal is okay, it's not about what they're doing that's annoying you. What do you need differently and why? And how would that make you feel? That's where I try and take them, which is a much more solid conversation than stop doing that.
Right.
Stop annoying him. It's like, then it's parent-child again, and then it's about, it's not an in-depth conversation.
And neither side owns any part.
Yeah, so that's essentially the model to essentially back this up.
So this, asking for what you want, this rule, it sounds familiar, and you even reference it, managing up. And managing up, I'm hearing now, it's called leading up, but the principles are the same. But the first step is really the hardest. In talking about this, people don't realize they can ask their boss for what they needed.
Yeah,
they don't believe it.
And there's a subtle difference between ask for what you need in a conflict scenario and managing up in a business scenario. And that is, and again, it's subtle. To manage up with your boss, you want to, you're more mindful of creating a win-win solution so that all they see is benefit to them as well. For example, when I said to Terry, if you could tell me what you need so that I could be prepared and we can have more efficient meeting and I don't have to waste your time, that created the Why would he say no to that? Why
Right.
would anybody say
Right.
no, right?
Right.
So that's the managing up part. In a conflict, I'm asking for my need because we have a commitment to our relationship.
And there's often more of an emotive.
Yeah,
Not always.
And it's really about a commitment to each other. It's not, so the win-win is to be in relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a business need being met.
Okay.
So sometimes it's easier to actually have this conversation managing up because you're not as vulnerable because you're trying to present a business need
Right.
where we both benefit by you doing this.
Right.
But the beauty though is my frustration with Terry, that's a nice sound, isn't it? My vibration with Terry dissipated
Mm-hmm.
when he said yes because he saw the business need. And the same thing happens in a personal relationship too, which is why it can be very advantageous to be able to know what the need is not being met.
How did he respond with you after that, just to kind of put closure on that? Because it's a really good example. I mean, what's the epilogue?
It kind of gave us, and it was just between me and Terry. It's like, it's not the thing I could really share, but I could give him a hard time in a kind of humorous way.
Right. You kind of
Right before he hangs up. Oh, and Terry, no, what was it about? I could kind of, and it kind of created an opening in a personal relationship almost.
Right.
Where we could do that, and it was such an easy thing for him that I think he did subconsciously start applying it with other people, not realizing that really it was because of our dynamic that kind of, and it was. And he was open to feedback. No, everyone was just afraid to give it to him.
Right.
Because the last guy that did.
Right. And you never know all the dynamics going into that last, the whole story. But still, that's good. And it seems also when people, and I've seen people do this, there's the relationship tends to, there's the power differential, but the tone changes.
Yeah.
Breaking down.
Yeah, because here's the other thing, too, is what I wanted to say.
Right.
Again, what I wanted to say from emotion
Right.
is I wanted to say, my God, you're the executive director.
And you
need to know how to lead people. Why? That's what I wanted to say. That was the emotion.
Right.
But because I spoke from here, this went away, and then this immediately dissipated because there's nothing holding it in place.
Well, let's look at putting this in practice. I mean, when someone, let's say someone in our audience is having a problem with a coworker, what would this look like? What should they do in applying this model?
And keep in mind that this is something people can do themselves. It's like self-coaching, or of course we offer coaching, so we can do it with them. But here's the questions, and I wrote them down because I don't want to mess them up. But the 5 questions are: what need is not being met in this situation? Right, the obvious. What's the impact of that need not being met? Like, how's it impacting me? And it's just to give me more data to clarify how I want to make a request. It's really why I'm doing this. What do I need differently? So it's one thing to know what the need is, but I've got to be able to say, what do I need differently so I can pose that request?
Right.
What would that look like? And then how would I ask that? And those are just all the kind of ways that I went through to go, that's it. I'm going to ask for him to tell me what he needs from me on the phone call. And so those steps will walk you through there. Now, here's the thing. It's not just expressing a need, because like you could say, well, like if I'm frustrated with you, I'm like, well, okay, I watched the video, so I need you to stop being a jerk.
Right.
Well, that's not coming from a need at all.
Right.
That's using the word need in a judgment, in an attack.
To vent. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The better way would be, I need to feel more support from you. See, I'm making it about me. Versus, I need you to stop being a jerk is about you, which means you're not talking needs at all. You're just using the language.
And it's also very disarming in terms of defensiveness. So when we come at it from ourselves, there isn't that immediate pushback.
Yeah.
At least not always.
Right.
So, yep. Well then, so with this, the 5 steps, what need of yours is not being met? What is the impact on you or the need of the need not being met? What would you need differently, or what would you like differently? what would that look like? So very behavioral. And then how will you ask for it? And asking that's kind of the rubber hitting the road and
Yeah.
to make that request.
Yeah. Because if you don't ask.
And even using the term request, I found could be helpful.
Yeah.
In kind of
It
minimizing.
presents it in a win-win.
Right. Well, so what other sources related
Well,
with this?
Yeah, I'm in the class, because as people know,
Right.
we actually have the class of the 8 simple rules. There's the first 4 and the second 4, and we provide a notebook.
Mm-hmm.
We do exercises. Or people can opt to watch the 4 videos, 4 videos for one, the first half, and 4 videos for 5 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
And we should have these completed probably at the beginning of next year. So there's certainly that, but there's also a handout that I'm going to include with this video on the Fridays at Noon page,
Okay.
which is just a user, I think I have it here. It's just a user-friendly handout, which is really 5 steps, and it won't make sense by showing it here, but I'll have this available, and it gives an example for each, and so people can just pull that handout and just kind of work it through the handout.
And this could be something in advance.
Yeah.
I take it kind of a tool. That's good.
Yeah, and it could be used just to ask somebody to stop doing their annoying behavior,
Mm-hmm.
but that it's a way of wording it such that it makes them understand why and the impact it's having and why it makes sense to change it.
When you do some of your just-in-time coaching, is this a common topic or request or query that you get? Along these?
Yeah, and sometimes it comes from multiple directions. It could be a managing up scenario, or it could be just somebody that's in conflict with more than one person, and a lot of people, they just don't know. They just need a starting point.
Yeah.
And of course, all these 8 rules is a starting point, but this in particular could be something that you could bypass everything and just have that conversation. I prefer that they have the context around it,
Right.
but nevertheless, that could be very helpful in that regard.
It dawns on me when we think of this rule and process, we kind of approach it from, looking up, but this would be a good tool for managers and how they communicate with their staff.
Yeah.
Because, going through that example, how much damage that does.
Yeah.
And the manager might not even realize that they're not inherently evil, but they don't think. But the impact of how they communicate just shuts everything down. So, interesting tool. So walk us through the first 6 rules and kind of how they interact. We talked last time about how they're starting to link together. So walk us through that.
Rule 1 was begin with the end in mind. So if you haven't watched that, definitely, you need to watch them all, right? And in a nutshell, that's just to be goal focused, to go into any conversation with an outcome in mind. Even if it's a stranger, it could be a much shorter outcome of survival or get through this or just don't, be respectful and move on. But so whatever that goal focus is, so that creates and you stick with that, and then you don't get distracted by all these other things. The second one was stay off the ladder, which is really about don't act on assumptions. Because what happens is, we judge a situation and then we decide what we think happened and what their intent was, and that triggers the emotion, and then we respond from there. And as people will see as they go through that's only half the story, and that you've got to get the full information before you have a heart-to-heart conversation, for example.
And that's that immediate escalation that occurs.
Yeah, and in all of these, we talk about how if you're triggered and you're emotional, you shouldn't be having the conversation in that state of mind anyway. So these are more thought-provoking responses, not in the moment is, as we've talked about in some of these, I think in begin with the end in mind, is have a plan B, which is an escape route. Right. Because if any conversation you have in that emotional state, you're going to regret in most cases. Number 3 was choose your style, which was really about the 5 conflict styles. Knowing that one tends to be more natural to us based on how we grew up with our families and stuff. But it's not necessarily the best style for every situation. But if we're not mindful of situations, what will happen, mindful meaning making a choice of the conflict style versus being the conflict style. And what happens is if we react immediately, we go to our automatic pilot conflict style, which probably 50% of the time is not the appropriate one.
And all of those styles can be appropriate.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation.
Yeah, and that's why you want to choose them instead of just kind of automatically do it.
Right.
Rule 4 was take the initiative, and that's really the self-care rule, because too many times people get caught up in who's right and who's wrong and who should apologize and who should, and that you're at fault, and with the finger pointing.
Right.
And the problem is we if we're bothered by a dynamic, we wear it, and it impacts our body, our emotions, our everything, let alone the tension in that relationship. And the point of that is let go of the right or wrong or who should go first. Do it for yourself. Have the conversation so that you can lift that off your shoulders. Otherwise, it's going to take you down in many ways. Yeah. Don't give them that power.
Right.
And the ego wants to do it a certain way because you were the one. And it's about letting that go. And then, of course, our last one that we talked about was focus out before focusing in, which really is, using Stephen Covey's words, seek to understand before replying, or before being understood, I think is what he said. And that is that there's a huge advantage in tension to let someone else vent and talk and just be understanding, because they're almost doing their own work.
Yeah.
And then you get the advantage of hearing the whole story, the impact, and getting more data. And then if you have the ability to then respond, you're in a much stronger place. Mm-hmm. So all of these kind of interact with each other. There's not necessarily one that's first, second, third. We just numbered them for the sake of having 8. And then we've got 2 more to go, which are critical ones. So we hope that everybody sticks through all 8.
Well, and I think about these rules, they do link together and they reinforce each other. So it's not like they're not hard to memorize, because they go together pretty easily, and just a matter of practice.
Right.
And so we will be completing the series after the first of the year. But thank you for presenting or talking with me today. And I do want to point out we're excited about a number of topics coming in the next few months. Notably, our next one will be on anger management and dealing with that in the workplace. And so you and I are going to have a discussion about that. It's a common question that we get, so we thought would make that open and talk about it. It's a good thing to discuss. So, well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Always. Thank you for joining us on Fridays at noon, and have a good rest of your Friday and weekend.
Thank you.